Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 98th installment of the 706 podcast, the podcast in which the four movie fiends discuss, rate, and review a film once per episode in an attempt to determine the objective list, the scientifically evaluated, expertly curated list of the 706 greatest films of all time. I'm not sure how many are in our canon right now. I think our hit rate is slightly over half, so probably got 50 some or so. So we've got a little ways to go. But this week I am hosting, and I'm bringing in a film that I enjoy, Koji Fukada's 2016 drama, tragedy, horror film. Number of descriptors could possibly apply to this movie, which I'm sure we'll discuss here in a minute. This movie's called Harmonium. Now, I will allow my co-hosts to introduce themselves momentarily, and let's make it fun. Let's do alphabetically by middle name.
I am Connor. Alec.
I don't know what Anthony's middle name is, but I'm Kirk James.
It's a trick question. I don't have a middle name. It's Anthony.
Got
Do you
him.
really not have a middle name? All right,
Nope.
so you could have gone first or last, but
Yeah.
if you'd gone in the middle, that would have been wrong. But I think that'll fly. Okay,
I should have actually gone in the middle because I don't have a middle name.
Really, there's really no wrong place for you to go. Honestly, I think as long as Connor goes before Kirk, we're okay. Okay, the podcast reviewers are nodding appreciatively with what we've done so far. Okay, so this film, as I said, it's Koji Fukada. He's a Japanese filmmaker. He's in his early 40s, and he has, not a ton of work under his belt. I think he has like 6 or 7 features out at this point. He works in a number of different styles. This movie, as I said, was from 2016, debuted at Cannes in the Uncertain Regard category, where it won the jury prize. Was pretty well reviewed, did not do particularly well commercially. Sort of a cult favorite, or it's kind of a cinephiles pick. It's not a movie that's like, particularly regarded or is on a bunch of best of decade lists or anything, but it was well reviewed at the time. I discovered it, last year, and it really kind of drew me in. He did another film called Hospitality back in, I believe, 2012, which actually was sort of a kind of a dry run for this movie. He apparently had the outline or the idea, the premise for this movie for a very long time and had a hard time getting it funded. And Hospitality was like his initial attempt at it. Hospitality is basically the first half of this movie. You have a family in a house, and you have this stranger coming in, and things just kind of escalate. But in that film, it's a much more comedic film. This movie is much more tragic, much more dark in tone. And I should introduce the premise of the movie, which is essentially we have a small nuclear family, a husband, a wife, and a young daughter. And the father works in a machine shop, which is in the house, in the garage. His wife is a housewife, and his daughter is just a child. She plays the harmonium, goes to school. And then this mysterious man just kind of shows up one day and just inserts himself into their lives with the father's kind of permission. And his wife has kind of mixed feelings about this. And they have some sort of relationship in their past. The father says they're old friends, but the nature of their relationship and their history together is kind of slowly unraveled over the course of the movie. But yeah, that's about all I can say as far as the setup or the premise, because this is a movie that goes into some very out there directions, or it strays very far from that initial premise, and it blossoms and grows into these very unsettling, disturbing, unexpected kind of directions. Now, before I kind of say my piece on the film, beyond what I've already said, I know Connor has seen the movie before, and I'm pretty sure this is Anthony and Kirk's first time. Is that correct? Okay. Why don't we start in that case with Anthony? Anthony, so first of all, have you seen any of Koji Fukada's other films? And whether or not you have, what did you think of this film? What was your take?
Sure. So it's actually pretty funny that you mentioned he only had like 6 or 7 movies feature length, which is to me a pretty decent amount. But I actually have never heard of any of these. Scanning down the list, Love Life, The Real Thing, Girl Missing, they sound interesting. And from a kind of quick synopsis, there's something I definitely would want to check out, even based on the film that we watched for today, Harmonium. Now, a couple of things, and I'll keep this kind of brief because I'm actually more curious, I think, for your explanation why you've liked it, Tony, and what Connor's opinion, having seen it twice, is. On one hand, I think the movie's, and I mean this actually as a compliment, is a very serviceable movie in the sense that it all works. I could see the pieces of the Tony formula at play. I could see the pieces of a kind of a general kind of critical fervor like at work. And I'm still struggling to kind of put my thoughts together coherently for this. But there's something about this movie that I hate, that we've talked about before, and I think we each kind of hate doing this, but at times we do. It's just human nature. Is like watching this movie, I couldn't help see pieces of a movie I would have liked it to be, and I couldn't help seeing pieces of a different movie that I would have made had I had the chance to make this like myself. And so what I mean by that is I'm much more interested in this movie if it was from the wife's perspective. The wife who, of course, is kind of in the dark about who her husband was in his past, or this kind of grand act that her husband committed in the past. Kind of, in some ways, a loyal, good-natured wife in the beginning of the film who is targeted for blame, of course, by the husband to some degree, as a way of culpability for himself, as a way of kind of atoning for his sin or receiving punishment for his sin of a past moment. And what I mean by being more interested in her is the movie to me never made me really care that much about the husband, because I struggled to do this throughout the movie. Is I was wondering the whole time why they were together to begin with. And part of that may just be the kind of stay in nature, the kind of withdrawn nature of this, of a different culture, a different society, the way it's presented on film, which is a kind of miserablest kind of cinematic approach, a very kind of slow, moody piece in which the mood ultimately makes the movie. Maybe I just wanted more human warmth at some point between the two. Maybe I just wanted some sort of human warmth to explain why these two characters are a different couple in that second half of the movie, as the husband explains, when they don't really feel that different to me from start to end. So I don't know. It's one of these weird things where like I see a movie that technically works and I think works well, but I don't see a movie that technically works well for me, even if I think there's stuff to praise about it. So I don't know if I talked in circles, but maybe I need to hear more things out to kind of flesh out some of these thoughts myself. But I got to say is, at the end of the day, the movie did raise some really like fascinating, I think, philosophical and more moral questions around the nature of disability, around the nature of caregiving, relationship, love, this kind of quote unquote hauntedness of the past. And maybe that's something else that we'll all get into. But those are all the kind of general things that I think I would want to talk about over the next, part of the discussion.
For sure. I think that's a reasonable take. I mean, I think that, yeah, this is definitely a movie that's going to, leave a lot of people cold, I think. I think that's by design. I think, coldness is a big part of the tone. And I'll hand this off in a second, but I do think on that note, when you say talking about caregiving and disability, it would probably be beneficial for me to kind of elaborate a bit on the film's plot a bit. So basically, what is unveiled as the movie progresses is that this mysterious stranger, whose name is I'm looking at the IMDb, Yaska, knew the husband, whose name is Toshio. They knew each other as young men. They were, at least one of them was involved in the Yakuza, but basically they were accomplices in a murder. And we don't know that Toshio was actually an accomplice until later of the film. We just know that he was there, or that he had some sort of involvement. We don't know in what capacity. But we find out by the end of the movie that he, in fact, held a man's legs down while Yaska strangled him to death. And Yasuka never snitched on him, never told the authorities about his friend's involvement. He goes to prison for, a long time for murder, while Toshio's out and having a life and having a family. So Basically, at the midpoint of the film, almost exactly halfway through, Yasuka's apparent planned revenge comes to fruition, in which, through some off-screen act of violence that is never quite elaborated on, he injures Hotaru. Sorry, he injures Hotaru, the daughter, and there's a time jump. And then the second half of the movie, which is set 8 years later, we see that Hotaru is now essentially in a vegetative state, or not a vegetative state. I'm sorry. She is quadriplegic. She cannot move her muscles. She cannot speak. She's completely helpless, completely unable to move or to fend for herself in any way. And her parents, she's completely reliant on her parents for absolutely everything as an adult. So that is like the big turn halfway through the movie. So that is, I think, helpful information to have for some context in what we're discussing. So now, all right, Kirk, bring us in here. What are your thoughts on Harmonium?
Yeah, Tony, I think it's often pretty hit or miss with the films you bring forth and how I react to them, but this was a rather enjoyable one. I guess I was unsure initially, or in the early stages of the movie, whether or not there was anything really going on. It starts off rather slowly. You can already kind of tell that it takes itself rather seriously from the beginning, which makes for some tedium at times, some dramatic moments of silence and kind of tension building that really is dependent upon your engagement and your level of intrigue. The feeling of wanting to know more about these characters, that I think can vary from person to person. I think some people might just, due to attrition, just turn this movie off after 20 minutes because it's not very engaging in the early parts. I mean, at least traditionally speaking. But it gets going. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting look at kind of the interplay between generations, right? It's like this intergenerational recursive battle or dance, kind of atoning for the sins of your father or for the sins of your child, I guess. But it's interesting, right? They start off right away with the discussion about spider babies eating their mother and what that means. And so it seems like that's very much what this director's going for. And in that sense, it gives off like pretty strong Place Between the Pines vibes, at least for me. And also that film, there's a time jump as well. I think the wife, I was originally unsure about, the wife mother. I'm sorry, I forget the character's name, but I was originally unsure about whether or not she was a character worth investing any interest in. But because she seemed rather kind of closed off, provincial, like kind of a very bland taupe character. But the way that her daughter's injury affected her was actually really interesting to see the progression. You see the physical progression. I mean, this actress gained weight for the second half of the movie. She probably put on 20 pounds. You see it. I don't know. It might be a suit, but you see it in her face as well. And you just see it. You see a general kind of disengagement with the world that feels right given what's happened. I think I agree with Anthony that most of my fascination lays with the mother, and to that effect, I do think they did a good job, especially at the end, or the director did a good job of kind of highlighting her agency. Right, her actions end up killing both her daughter and Yasuka's son. It's a really kind of, you know, messy ending. There's like a twinge of nihilism in the last half hour that's really unsettling, especially when it's juxtaposed to the harmonium and that kind of quaintness that one feels when they hear that instrument. But yeah, no, I think it's a movie that's steeped in metaphor. There's so much on the bone here. You know, when you go this far, it's like almost, it's not even A24 territory. It's like A25 territory. Like this is like a movie that, you know, really, really wants to send a message, and then you're balancing on a very thin line between just being too heavy-handed. And I think there were times where it was a little much. But overall, I really enjoyed the film. It's one of the films where, you know, when you watch it, we, for full disclosure, we record pretty much right after watching the movies. And it's a film that I think would benefit from being discussed maybe a few days, if not a week later, because there is so much to take in and internalize. But my initial impressions, they're rather scrambled. I think it was good. I think it was pretty affecting, to be honest. Yeah, I enjoyed it really to a great degree. I'm still processing, so I'd like to hear what Connor has to say, and then you, Tony, as well.
Oh, very good. Well, I'm glad it spoke to you. I'm glad there were aspects of it that resonated with you and that you enjoyed the film. So, last but not least, we were going to go with Connor. Connor has, in fact, seen this one before. We watched this at the same time, early last year, I believe. But Connor, so you've seen it before. So what do you? And I believe you have some familiarity with Koji Fukada's other films. So and Hospitality, the film I referred to at the beginning. So you know, how does this movie fit in with his oeuvre? And, you know, how does the movie feel to you? I think you liked it initially, but how has this movie changed for you on a second watch? Has it grown? Has it diminished? Have certain things been recontextualized? Because this is a movie that when you watch it a second time, it's really a different experience because you know what's coming. You know, it's a very, like, the kind of the sense of tedium Kirk alluded to. I didn't feel that the first time necessarily, but you definitely don't feel it the second time because you're just waiting with this dread for what you know is coming. So anyway, so I'll let Connor have the floor.
No, I think I agree, Tony, with your assessment watching it the second time. I think this movie bears watching a third time, a fourth time. I think it's a movie you can definitely rewatch for the reasons that you mentioned, waiting for the other shoe to drop. The tension, though, I would say that that's kind of part of the ingredient of the movie, is this kind of tension. What's going to happen? We're waiting for this outcome, right? And it's interesting compared to Hospitality, which is a movie that I've loved. I watched it, I think, when we were still at NYU, and I always kind of championed that movie. It really spoke to me. I don't want to get all into it now, but it's, again, as Tony mentioned, the same premise of a stranger shows up taking this job in the shop, right? And sort of becoming then integrated into the family, and the kind of the fallout of that. And A Girl Missing is a little bit like that as well. It seems like Fukada keeps coming back to this very simple premise, kind of developing it and developing it and developing it and complicating it. Obviously, Harmonium is much kind of darker, more bleak, sort of take on this premise, with different sort of thematic interests as well. I think what's interesting about Harmonium, and what I think was very marked to me this time, is that kind of divide between the first and second parts of the movie, that is before and after this time skip of 8 years. And I found that watching this time, I was very rapt. I was very with the movie. I was very engaged in the first half, which is comparatively a much, much simpler story of the stranger showing up, who we have good reason to be suspicious of. This is the Tadanobu Asano's character, and he's just played so well. This kind of stiff man who we have no idea, and he seems to have all these different sides to him, and we have no idea what he's really about, what he's like. He's a threat, right? Slowly, with simple kind of cinematic techniques and information being shared with us, we're led to believe and to kind of see this character as kind of a hero, or an innocent, at least someone who took the fall, who's atoning for his actions. It's a simple kind of reversal. Then, of course, it ends with this explosion of violence as the character, right, kind of takes off his white outer layer to reveal the red beneath, right? And that's this like kind of color symbolism that connects to the Christianity themes and all this. To me, it kind of nails it. It's not necessarily like reinventing, cinema. It's kind of classic cinema. It's a classic story. Reminds me a little bit of Postman Always Rings Twice. It is a simple story ultimately. Now then, Fukada does kind of another movie within the movie, which is to say, okay, I've done that story. Now, how do I develop it in a way that no one would expect, which is to do this 8-year jump? And this is where I think the movie just gets too complicated. There's just so many things going around. There's so many ideas being bandied back and forth. I find it hard to kind of to orient myself. And I guess that's probably the point, right? That we're supposed to feel kind of disoriented, nihilistic, exhausted. What can be done? I think there's a little bit of a kind of a cruelty to the second half that the first half doesn't have, that the first half kind of pulls its punches in a way. The second half, to me, ends up becoming a little bit kind of like misery porn or something like that. Not porn, of course. It's not really fun to watch. It just feels so. There's something about it that doesn't speak to me. I'm left cold. I'm left a little bit. That's kind of my take. I really like the first half of the movie, and there's something that I don't like about the second half. I think there's something kind of flawed. There's too many things going on. I wish it had been more focused.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty reasonable take. I mean, this is a movie that, there's a Tony movie in a lot of ways. Obviously, the bleakness and the unsparing brutality of it, the aesthetic starkness. There's a lot of kind of Tony hallmarks in here. But yeah, one of the things this movie does that's very bold and daring, which is another hallmark of movies I like. I like movies that take big swings, that take big risks, even if those risks don't always pan out necessarily. I like movies that show like a willingness to go places, to go there, I guess. And this movie very much does in a lot of different ways. And one of the biggest ways is with that time jump, because as Connor said, the first half of this movie tells more or less a complete story. You could end the movie at that halfway point, and I think it would be a completely satisfying, very classically written tale of chickens coming home to roost, which is another, classic Tony theme. So why does the movie continue for another hour, essentially, right? And, I don't know that every choice that second hour makes necessarily pans out, but I think that it's not to no effect. I think that second hour does enrich the experience. It does deepen the movie in a way. And I think that feeling of complication, that feeling of messiness, that feeling of everything kind of unraveling is kind of essential to the movie's overall effect. This event happens halfway through the movie where, their daughter is attacked and she's permanently disabled. And it's this viscerally horrifying thing. I mean, and the way it's handled, I think, is so incredible. Where we get this shot, we get this cut, one of like the best cuts I've ever seen, to Yasaka. He's standing over Hotoru's body in the playground, and there's just this trail of blood leading back from her head, and he's just standing there completely impassively and looking down at her. And the movie presents this like totally matter-of-factly, and we take it in the way that Toshio is taking it in, which is like we're like looking at it and we're like, what are we even seeing? Like, it takes a second to really even process what we've just seen. Then we get the time jump, and we see kind of the results of this, and it inspires this kind of pity and this kind of horror about what we've witnessed, which is maybe maybe there's something, and we had this discussion a little bit in Oasis as well, which maybe there is something kind of unsavory about that, about using disability as a kind of a horror device, or trying to horrify the audience with Because people like this obviously exist in the world, and their lives have value and they have family that cares about them and so forth. But in the context of the story and in the context of any of our lives that's happening, it would be a horrifying thing for sure. So, but I think that seeing the results of what has happened, seeing the results of what the first half, and seeing how the characters have to live with it is very interesting, because the whole movie's about the past. The whole movie's about how we deal with the past. The past events that set the whole movie into motion are all off screen. They're only described. And in the second half of the movie, there's an event that, while not explicitly depicted, we did see dramatized, and we have to see how the characters kind of react and how these, one event begets another event, and how kind of the trauma compounds upon itself. But seeing things like, Kirk alluded to with Akia's onset of sort of I don't want to diagnose her as OCD necessarily, but she's kind of stereotypically OCD. She's washing her hands a lot. She seems to be having these like hallucinations where she's, haunted, in a very literal sense by Yasaka. She's seeing him around. She's counting. She's developing these kind of rituals to cope with the horrible trauma of what she's witnessed. And we see how Toshio has just retreated into his work, basically, right? And these dynamics that we see play out are established in the first half of the movie, where Toshio is this, very stoic, very impassive, patriarchal figure who, never really exudes any sort of warmth for his wife and daughter throughout the movie. He's very much about the duty. He's about doing his job as a father. He's about doing his job, his literal job in the workshop. And once he's kind of done those things, that's his role, and he's fulfilling his role, and you see that carried out in the second half of the movie. I think that messiness and seeing how these characters react to this trauma in their lives is interesting, and does, deepen the movie in a way, even if I do kind of agree with Connor that I think the first half is more compelling. The first half is more aesthetically perfect. I think, the introduction of Takashi, the son of Yasaka, does complicate the movie in a way I'm not sure I like. However, I think there is something to be said for the surrealism and the horror of the moment where it's revealed that he is in fact Yasaka's son. When you see Toshio's reaction of just kind of like disbelief and like anxiety. I think the second half also gives us what honestly might be the best scene in the movie, because the movie is so much about the family unit, and it's about being isolated within it, or it's about the feeling of isolation. It's about having secrets that burden you, and how does that affect living as a family, right? And all the characters have secrets, but it's about how these secrets, burden us and kind of make things unravel. So in the second half of the movie, there is a scene, there's a conversation between Akiya and Toshio in the office, where everything is just kind of laid out on the table. And it is the most like bracing, like visceral scene in the movie, just because he calmly and just directly says exactly what happened. And I think there's a real intelligence in the screenwriting here for when exactly Fukada is doling out information, or we find out a little bit early on and then a little bit more later. And only at this point, almost at the end of the movie, are we finding the full story of what happened and the extent of Toshio's complicity in this horrible crime. And we see his wife's horror, her disgust. She's covering her face and like doesn't want to believe that it's really happening. And he also says like that what happened to his daughter was a punishment or a curse, which in the context of the movie, it basically is. It functions narratively as that. His wife is horrified by this, but this is also an attitude that I have just, in my life, I've heard expressed, or I've seen expressed by parents of severely disabled children. Like, this is a real feeling that exists in the world. And the wife is horrified by it, but you get the sense almost that she is trying to deny that feeling that may exist in herself. But I find that scene is so powerful. And I think honestly, for me, kind of justifies the whole second half. I think to me as well that like this movie's tone is so just perfectly calibrated. Just that feeling of like, I always use the terms like dreamlike or nightmarish to kind of describe tone. And I think it's a little bit of a cop out in a way, But I think this movie really nails that exact feeling. It's not surreal in any traditional sense, but that sense of like, I think early in the movie we get a shot of the harmonium and the metronome and just that click, 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 and just that objective, relentless, ruthless progression of time, totally indifferent to what's happening. I think that nails the feeling of the movie, just that slow, just inevitable progression where not a lot might be happening right now, but things will be happening and they'll happen at their own pace. And we are powerless to stop them. And that's the feeling of being trapped in a nightmare where the thing is going to happen and something's going to happen, but you're not sure what it is, but it is coming. And that feeling of just overwhelming horror sitting alongside the banality of the everyday, just these everyday interactions, these everyday conversations, having lunch, having breakfast. I think that adds to the movie's power, the sense that in our day-to-day lives, in our day-to-day interactions, there is this lurking horror. There is something potentially beyond the surface. Do you truly know your partner? Do you truly know if something terrible happened to your child that they can't express, right? There are these things that are these uncertainties in all of our lives, that we can never have solved. And this is the movie is expressing that feeling, that anxiety that I think most of us have within us. It's an exploration of that feeling and of that idea in this kind of dream logic context. I think it's such a perfectly calibrated combination that completely sells the movie for me. So anyway, let's, like Kirk said, there's a lot of meat on the bone here, but I mean, we can take this in any direction you guys want. Is there anything in what I said that any of you disagreed with, or that maybe resonated with your experience of watching the movie, or just any kind of themes or motifs that you picked up on that you thought would be interesting to explore? I'll just open it up to whoever.
Yeah, let me actually bring up something because Connor touched on it and you did too, Tony. And in my experiences, I think the first half of the movie was probably more conventionally exciting. I agree. It had that kind of propulsion, which is more traditionally Hitchcockian. It reminded me of like Shadow of a Doubt or even like Stoker, which was a movie that did not have much love on this podcast. But the second half of the movie is actually, I think, once it ended, like in retrospect, the thing I gravitated to more. And I like a lot of what you're saying, Tony, but I had a little bit different of an understanding of the dad. I'm never going to get these names correct or pronounce them right. Toshiro? Is that the dad?
Toshio.
Okay, the dad. I was going to say the dad rather than butcher.
Oh my God.
This poor cultural, misunderstanding. Westerner here. Okay, so I view the dad as not a necessarily caring father. I viewed him as a very kind of dissociated one. He's never partaking in the religion of the family. He's never actually even with the family for the most part in an active way in the first half of the movie. He's asleep as the wife is like kind of going on these kind of dalliances with this mysterious stranger who in the white, at least from my like cultural perspective, hovers around the scene like a ghost. But in that middle scene that's so crucial to the movie, he basically accuses her of having an affair. And it seemed to put so much in perspective is that he actually seemed almost to have pushed her into this, like he wanted her to, because he's just living with so much guilt that the only thing better for him and the only kind of cure for it isn't to receive punishment, but for someone else to be living with as much guilt as he does. And for him to coldly accuse his wife of, just having this, or as I think in the subtitles I had, which was like, oh, you slept with him, right? And she doesn't deny it. And he doesn't even ask her. It's phrased as a direct statement. They're like, of course she did. And for him to bring this up years down the line, put like that first half in the movie into a new light in which he's constantly walking away when the stranger and her are together. He's constantly leaving the scene. He's always in the like workroom and he's always able to be like out of sight, but just out of sight enough as if he's walking away because he's waiting for it to happen. And so there's something fascinating to me about this, which was, what was their relationship like before? Was there a warmth to him like that drew this like kind of religious woman, this cat or monkey, depending on your interpretation, this metaphor that we get in the beginning of the movie and her devotion to religion? What drew her to him is still such a thing that bugs me, because I don't get the caring father. I get a devoted one. I get, instead of guilt-ridden man, who's a guilt-ridden man from start to finish until the very end when he's about to lose it all. You get kind of a hint of him saving the mother, and that she's kind of writhing and like breathing towards the end, but we don't fully know if she's going to make it out. So who does he save? Well, he saves the other one who may be as guilt-ridden as him. And I find that kind of very disturbing in a bleak, depressing kind of way. It's sort of the old like Dostoevsky idea of like, we're meant to find someone who deserves to suffer with us, or like that is actually an ideal of love, which may be a kind of cold, way to kind of spin this. But I don't know. I'm just kind of spitting out ideas. Anyway, I didn't mean to cut off Connor.
No, I think it's all super interesting. I think I have maybe a slightly different read on the dad. I mean, what I wanted to say was that in the first half, because we don't know necessarily exactly what the father's guilt is, we understand that, okay, he was involved. I think we get what's important is the speech we get of the stranger to the dad when they're on the fishing trip or whatever, they're on the trip to the river. He adopts this Yakuza persona and says exactly what we think the father fears is going to happen. That I'm going to come and I'm going to replace you. I'm going to take your life because you took my life away. I had to take the fall for you. Somehow that feels like, and I think Anthony's absolutely right, that this is what the father actually really kind of wants to happen. He's kind of letting this happen because of the sense of guilt. We may not understand exactly why, but like, I think in the first half of the movie, what I would say is that to me, like, no one is exactly guilty. Everyone maybe has some level of guilt, but it's kind of a very like, no one is guilty exactly, of course, until this strange act that we never understand, which is why the stranger hurts the daughter, right? What exactly that's about. We can, of course, speculate. It's not impossible to imagine. It's this frustration, this rage. But we don't really kind of know what that was about. And so it to me, up until that point, there's a sense that there's no kind of simple guilt. We get that sense of the kind of the chicken or egg sort of issue of the mother spider and the baby spider. Which one goes to heaven? Which one goes to hell? You never know, because like the baby spiders, all the mother spiders are already eaten their mothers as well, right? So like this kind of this sense that there is no guilt. But then we have, I think in the second half, we have these moments of pure, to me, kind of, obviously we have kind of pure evil from the father. I think, obviously there's this hideous thing that he says, in addition to that, to back up what Anthony's saying, in addition to he says, we became a proper couple after the accident, right? That's like this horrifying idea that like they were bound together by this guilt. She was stuck at home taking care of the daughter. It was sort of what he wanted all along. I mean, it's horrible. It's so hideous. And then I think also too, the mother's act of killing herself and the daughter, again, is really hideous, and it is kind of a guilty action, like we see with the red shirt. Anyway, I'm rambling, but like, I like the first half for its ambiguity, for its lack of guilt, for guilt being so complicated. Whereas the second one, we have this kind of very specific distribution of guilt of the father and the mother, certainly the father, but it's just not as interesting to me as the first half.
Well, what if like in the first half though, they do carry a guilt? It's like the guiltiness of like the banality of everyday life. I mean, on one hand, our mysterious stranger is literally guilty that he's coming out of a prison, incarceration. He's literally been sentenced to it. There's the kind of person who's never been found guilty because he was never named in a trial. So he's been able to get away with it and carry in a kind of emotional baggage to it. The child fears the kind of different levels of guilt that may be in play. And in fact, she's guilty of being truant in her harmonium lessons. She's fleeing it. She's hiding from it until the stranger brings it back. The mother kind of has these things that she's keeping hidden that we never know. She's just kind of this like presence that's hovering in the lives. And in fact, she's guilty of being unsure about her own identity with religion. What does she really believe? And in fact, the stranger's purpose there is to give her an easy metaphor of like, oh, you're like the cat, you've just been carried to this religion. And she's like, no, I'm more like the monkey. I'm trying to figure things out. It's on me, like, or I'm carrying something with me. So I wonder if maybe, I'm not saying I disagree. I just do think there's something a bit more complicated there. But this also gets me to another thing I was really fascinated by, which is, what does the mysterious stranger like want? He shows up and it's like, on one hand, we could be like literal and be like, oh, he just wants a place to stay and a job. But slowly he starts to kind of fall in some ways for the mother. He's writing letters this whole time, or so he says. Like, where everyone's taking everything he says at face value and truthfully, like as if he's completely honest, which is another way of like thinking, like, what are we doing as an audience member? But like, what does he actually want out of all this? For him just to disappear at the end, like up until this point, he's a kind of a wholesome stranger, except to the dad. I don't know. Like, I'm just kind of curious. But anyways, I don't mean to cut you off too, Kirk, if you're we're about to say something.
No, I don't know, man. I mean, this movie kind of fries your brain a little bit, and it's very heavy stuff. And like, this stuff is, it's not La La Land. It's not like, it's a movie that wants to kind of drag you down with it. And I guess from an artistic perspective or an aesthetic perspective, that's pretty cool. I usually like jumping in really, to try to wade through all this, but I'm trying to look at this from a different perspective, come up with different angles. Something that did strike me is like, how do we know that he actually hurt her? That Yasuka actually hurt Hotoro? How do we know that? How do we not know that she fell over and he approached her? He was actually going to save her, and then he realized, or he was frozen in the moment and he realized what it looked like, and that's why he disappeared, right? Like, he knew he was already a convicted murderer. He was going to be implicated in this one as well, or this death, or maiming, but looks like a death in the immediacy of the moment. I don't know. I think that's a fun thing, and fun, wrong word, but like the idea that, she knows the truth, but she can't communicate it to her parents, who are hell bent on revenge. But no, I just think there's a level of, there's a certain amount of permutations you can make after watching a film like this. So it's definitely mind bending, and ultimately, to what effect, right? Like, let's zoom out a little bit. Like, we could go over the themes all day. I mean, there's so many little anecdotes that beget grander, illusions, and it just, it can feel overwhelming. But like, what is the effect for the audience, right? That's the thing I'm most curious about. I think it encourages us to rethink our relationship to the present moment, and our associations, and like how we how we process our own morality. I think what was this, Satoshi, I believe his name was, the little comment about why he draws, right? He doesn't draw for pleasure. He draws because he's compelled to draw, because of the information he gains from doing so. And I think, watching a movie like this can be seen in the same way. It's not enjoyable by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, there were moments, I guess, where you feel the tension, and that is kind of riveting. But ultimately, it's hard to be in a better mood after finishing this movie than before. But I think so. If you're not enjoying it necessarily, are you, like, at least on a visceral level? I guess you can enjoy it on an intellectual level, but are you at least learning something about yourself or the people in your life? And I think this movie does excel at that, because it allows you to really take a look at guilt. And for me, I do think the wife isn't, she feels that guilt, but I don't think she actually is guilty. I think she, this could be a whole other topic of discussion about, like, how complicit was she in the fact that they kissed and everything. I think where she feels the guilt is, she was basically assaulted by this dude in the kitchen. So she lies down to like recover. Basically, a post-traumatic response. And she takes a nap, and obviously that's not her baseline because the husband says, he's like, "Are you all right?" And the fact that someone would say that to somebody who's just lying down, it shows that she's usually very chipper and very like always involved in everything. And so she's detached, and I think she feels guilty for that because maybe she would have started looking sooner for her daughter, right? Like some time has passed. And so that's where I think the guilt aspect comes in, and carries into the second half for her more specifically than just like I was involved with this guy. But well, I will say the dream sequence at the end, that was really, really good. That was like, I don't know, it's ineffable how you describe what a dream should feel like or look like, but it did a really great job. So I think hats off to this guy for his ambition, but yeah, not necessarily easy to discuss without really getting into the weeds, which I don't know. Does that matter? Maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe it's just like a solitary experience because I feel like we're not adequately conveying the experience of watching this film.
I think a great film can't be described in words entirely. There's always going to be some aspect that you just have to experience it yourself, right? And I think this, for me, movie certainly qualifies. I think that as far as what does the audience take away, or like what is why do you watch this movie, right? If I'm telling someone about this movie who hasn't seen it, why should they watch it, right? That's, I think, kind of what you're getting at, to maybe put it more crudely. But it's like, why are we interested in tragedy in general, right? Why do we gravitate to these stories, right? These stories, Shakespeare's tragedies, are being told, hundreds of years later. What is it about them that we gravitate to? But I think in this particular case, what I gravitate to, and aside from just, I enjoy the dramatic tension, I enjoy sitting in this space with these characters. I like that feeling of dread, why, that's a whole other discussion. But I think something I get specifically from this movie is I think it illuminates aspects of the human condition. And this is something like great literature does for me that felt personal to me in my life. And I see, other people have had these feelings and these ideas, and there's something that connects us as human beings, right? These anxieties about love, about family, about having children, about the past, these are real ideas that, kind of speak to us all. Maybe not all of us necessarily, but certainly speak to me. And I think there is something that's, intellectually stimulating, certainly, about this movie, but also I think emotionally resonance in a way, and I don't end the movie feeling like I want to kill myself. I'm not like depressed. I'm more like, like that contextualizes this movie, almost gives me a vocabulary for thinking about certain things in my own life in a way that feels productive, and I feel good having watched this movie. I enjoy this movie, which, does that say something odd about me? Perhaps, but that's my emotional relationship with it. I don't know.
think as like one final note, because you brought up Shakespeare, and I think you talked about it like almost like in an obsessive compulsive way with the mother. The act of washing her hands, can't help but think of Lady Macbeth in those moments, of course. But one thing that actually irked me with this movie is, and I've become more like fascinated by this, and I think it was called I Origins. This is something I praised that movie for, but like I like it when movies are willing to like be serious and give a frank and honest discussion about spirituality and religion. And one of the things I was really curious about was like this whole Protestant Catholicism thing in the first half of the movie that like they never discussed in the second half, when you would think this huge life altering event would completely redefine how this mother thinks about her faith. And instead we're left with kind of just the symbolic metaphor of like a baptismal like trial by water moment, whether it's the ocean or literally jumping into a kind of moving body of like a river, I suppose, off the bridge in the end. And I just thought that was a real missed opportunity for something that wanted to be as like emotionally rich and complex as it was. Maybe that's just me, or maybe like there's more awareness for it than I caught on. But I really did think that was a missed opportunity.
I think that's totally fair. I agree. Yeah, I think it is kind of dropped. I think the implication is just that she has abandoned that part of herself, but I think that could have been explored in a more interesting way, or at least maybe made it more explicit that she'd abandoned it. I don't know. But yeah, it's kind of just ignored. But I think at this point we might want to transition into votes. I mean, this is a movie we could discuss for hours, I'm sure. As Connor said, you could watch this movie 5 times and have different kind of takeaways, which I think is part of the appeal for me. I guess one last thing I'd like to discuss before we vote is the ending of the movie, the actual ending of the movie, which is sort of ambiguous and on a couple levels. So, maybe Connor, maybe you can describe what precisely happens at the end, or at least your understanding of what happens, and how does that gel with the rest of the movie, and then what did you think of the ending?
Well, we don't know exactly what they think they're going to do, but they're going to find the stranger who they think they've found, or that this detective tells them. I mean, this I find kind of absurd that like they really think that he's there when it's just a guy in a white shirt, but they discover someone who seems to resemble, almost miraculously, almost like a dream. We see this, this figure from behind who looks like him, and then we see a character who looks like the daughter. Anyway, eventually the mother has this dream where she sees her daughter is able to kind of communicate with her. Whatever she says, I guess there's this conclusion, like we both have to die now. I don't know. That's one thing I feel like I don't quite get. I don't quite completely understand the mother's thought process, and maybe it was supposed to be more obvious to me. But she jumps into the river with her daughter. We have the son character, the son of the stranger, fishes them out, or they go. And there's, of course, at the very ending, we have to think about what the father is doing, who he seems to be saving. And it seems to be repeatedly, he kind of does not save the daughter. He turns to the daughter kind of last. Again, as a kind of guilty reaction, we think that he has to kind of think about it for a second, and then he goes to try to save the daughter. It's this bleak, horrible idea that, yeah, he really wanted her to die, almost that it's like she was just a symbol to him anyway, that it didn't really matter. Like, there's something just really so bleak, so horrible about that I kind of just want to look away, to be honest. And it's like, that's what I make of it. But,
struck by the thought, like, if Yasuka really wanted to disappear, race aside, he should have moved to Utah. Can you imagine? Like, okay, we have another picture of a man in a white button up, just from behind. We don't know if it's him or not.
The race might be a factor there.
Well, the race is that's the race aside. That means it doesn't count. See, so I said race aside, but I don't know that ending. I think there's so many other movies that are jumping into my head. Like Birdman jumps into my head. Shape of Water, Color of Water. With the fatherly guilt, paternal guilt of letting a child die. I think the way I read it is that he sees the daughter start to swim up toward the surface. Obviously, she's not doing that. She's being saved by the son. And so to me, it's like this idea that's very murky, but that the previous generation can't repent. It falls to the next generation to save each other, I guess. And then so on and so forth. I don't know, something like that. But that's what I read out of it. That somebody from the next level of effects, the next order of effect, was able to save her. And in his eyes, it looked like she was, everything had been fixed or something. Anyways.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that was the thing I was kind of fishing for with Connor, was that shot, and where it appears that Otoro is swimming upward to safety, as we're seeing it from the father's perspective. And again, it's sort of this kind of surreal, more overtly kind of dreamlike moment, similar to the mother's visions of Yasuka, that we see immediately before. So that's kind of what I was alluding to, with some of the ambiguity there, and like what exactly,
well, I presume it's actually swimming. So, I mean, to me, it's like the father, I mean, who knows what he's seeing, but it's like, yes, okay, that she is being saved, but we don't see the son character. To me, it communicates this idea of like he doesn't feel the need to save her in that moment, that maybe she's being freed by death, right? Which is kind of what's implied sort of in the mother's action as well. But to me, what was communicated in that is that it was only sort of on second thought that then he tried to save the daughter's life by doing CPR on her, which of course he's doing at the end. But it's not his first instinct somehow.
Is that like a further indictment of just like the father's continual like negligence of like the idea of like not really doing anything somehow like keeps him like around to the next day? And the fact of like not putting his name forward way back during the murder, not doing this. And I don't, I was actually going to ask, because like, I don't know if this was like my subtitles or if anyone else caught this, but every time something happened, he like would say like to put it away, and then the truth would come out. So he'd be like, don't tell like, you know, my wife that you like are his son. And then like she stumbles on the photo. And then the part that like I didn't understand is like when the detective calls with this like miraculous information, he says like, oh, we're actually over it. Like we're not interested anymore. And then the next scene is like them all driving over to go like find this guy. So like, are we just supposed to assume that like she found out again and like she convinced her husband to like go forward with it? Are we supposed to figure it out like based on this one call she gets, that it's like the detective also calling her? Or like, anyway, I was just kind of like thinking about that. I'm like, did I miss something, or is this like my subtitle issue?
No, it belies a larger issue. There were some issues with continuity earlier too in that pivotal scene that you've all referenced. She's referencing Yasuka's name in relation to Shitara as if her husband already knows that she knows. But how does he know that she knows that he's Yasuka's son? So that's something that doesn't make sense necessarily, because they haven't talked about it yet. So like she says, I think he's been asking about Yasuka after he says Shitara wants to quit. So I don't know. Did that not make sense to anybody else either?
No, I caught that too, and I thought it was another like moment where I just missed something.
If they could have had that conversation, you know, in the car before, I guess.
They could have had an off-screen conversation about it. That's true. All right. So let's get to the voting. It's getting late here. It's about 3 a.m. in Japan time, which is where I record every episode from, as we all know, as is canon in the podcast. So let's go ahead here. I think I will start with Connor. Connor, all the nuance, all the thoughtfulness, it's all boiled down to a simple binary now. There's no hard, there's no soft. It's a yes or a no. Let's do it. Let's see where it goes.
On the one hand, on the other hand, you know, I love my nuancing. You know, as it came back, I don't know, like what is my response? Of course, it's this classic story. It's something I almost dislike about it. This urge to look away, which I feel that the movie makes a point of looking away in the first half. There are some things we were not shown, right? Things are omitted. For instance, like the offer of the job, we get a little skip. We get a little, again, an off-screen conversation. Whereas I think in the second half, I don't know, could I verify this? Not as much is happening off-screen. We're seeing everything happen. We're forced to look. We're forced to watch, right? And of course, that's kind of the point of the movie, right? That's the son character with this very obvious, I thought this time very unsubtle, you know, metaphor about film, right? That we see, you know, this drawing as a metaphor for film, right? Again, I think it must be to the movie's credit that I want to look away. I can't quite describe my response. It's hard to give an account of like not responding to a movie. Again, I love the first half. I think I see everything that Tony and Kirk are both talking about in terms of their response and their feeling. And, you know, I watched this with my roommate, who also kind of said he had a sort of response. He kind of felt the vibe of it. The feeling came through to him. Like, I think there's a lot of merit to this, but just to drive a little bit of a hard bargain and make things interesting, I'm going to say no. You should watch Hospitality.
All right. Well, we just lost Pennsylvania. All right. That's all right. We're still got, it's young night. It's young night, folks. It's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. All right, now we turn to the great state of Michigan, and that is Anthony. Which way will Michigan go this cycle? Anthony, lay it on us.
Classic. Tony's been campaigning hard there for a long time. He's brought in Bernie to fielding. Let's see. So, talking through this movie, I've realized the problems I have with it, the problems I have that overextend to what I wish it would have got into based on the things that actually it set up in the first half. I talked about the religion. I talked about my uncertainty in the way it kind of handles the morality of guilt. I talked about also like my wish for more engagement and kind of bringing some of these off-screen discussions to the front, not just for entertainment, but for actually the movie to make, in some ways, a kind of more cohesive picture in some of the things it wants to address. And so in some ways, like, I don't quite get what everyone's saying when they talk about the vibe of it. I definitely walked away with the kind of bleak, the kind of cloud over my head, not in a depressive way, as Tony said, but in the kind of state of thought, the kind of state of, questions to ask myself and how I think about certain things regarding life, death, health, mental illness, mental health, physical health. And so in thinking about everything I've not quite getting, but in thinking about what I did get, I'm going to kind of give Tony the benefit here and say it's a yes for all the kind of provoked discussion I had in a way that I thought was better than something like Oasis, in a way that I thought was a little bit more, not intelligent, that's not the right word I'm looking for, but a little bit more engaging, I think, than I Origins, for instance. And so I don't know if I'll actually ever revisit this movie, but it's certainly something I'll never forget.
All right, the results are in, and we're seeing a lot of agnostic hockey moms coming out to the polls this cycle, and really an important story this election. All right, last but not least, this is going to be Decide 270. Got the great state of Wisconsin. How are we feeling? How are we feeling, Kirk? What's the story on the ground?
Well, it's going to come down to DePere County. We're going to see how the farmers vote, really. I mean, they had a fundraiser at Culver's last week. Both candidates showed up. No, let's see. It's interesting. I want to credit this film because I started off, like I said earlier, very much not finding the mother to be at all interesting or compelling or endearing or any of those, adjectives. But towards the end, I really felt a certain kinship with her. And I know you were kind of alluding to that, Tony, of like things you could experience, you feel like you've experienced in your own life. Or, yeah, I think this is a movie that is so close to being a masterpiece in certain ways. Like, yeah, if there was just a little more competence was shown, I think it could have vaulted into something pretty amazing. As it stands, I think it's really, really good. So I guess, you can't knock a film for not transcending time and space, but yeah, I did enjoy it. I was moved by it. And yeah, I will say that's, it's pretty easy to give it a yes. I will, I'm trying to, think if there was a way for me to turn this into a no. I was try to look at both sides, but I don't think there is any way. So it has to be a yes.
All right. And with that, Stone Cold Steve Austin has reached 270 electoral votes. America is saved. Thank you, Kirk. Yes, I this is one I could have gone either way. I honestly came into this expecting it to be a no. Just based on prior films, maybe that I'd compare this to the extent that we have those. So, but no, I'm pleasantly surprised. And all right, we're going to transition to the fan favorite segment in which these three fiends will pitch me a movie for us to do next time. And it is October. It is, spooky season, as we're fond of saying here. So each of them will pick a seasonally appropriate film. It's not Halloween. or sorry, not scary, not a scary movie, not a horror movie. Get that out of your heads. Don't even think about that. A Halloween seasonally appropriate film. We're talking Hocus Pocus. We're talking Charlie Brown, Great Pumpkin, Abracadabra special. We're talking all that nonsense. So, guys, don't scare me now. I've got a light heart, but let's get a good Halloween pick for this year, for this cycle. And let's start with I don't know who did. Connor, your least recent, so let's pick the order here.
Okay, definitely not me first. I pick Anthony to go first, then Kirk, then myself.
All right, sounds good. Anthony, let's hear it.
All right, this is tough. I'm actually deciding between two, or was deciding between two, and was hoping for a decade to be taken to help me out. But I'm going to go with the gut on this one and do something that I've complained that we haven't done enough in years past, which is an actual horror movie. I think we did Fright Night before. I think we did Monkey Shines the year before that. But this is a true, I think, Halloween movie, a true October movie. It's directed by Mario Bava, the great Italian giallo filmmaker. But it's a film I'm going to recommend we watch with the English dub, as Mario Bava intended. It's 1963's Black Sabbath. And for those who don't know, it's an anthology film about 3 different stories introduced by Boris Karloff in each time that are gory, that are bloody, that are scary. And you can't quite spoil it for it to fully work. So I don't want to actually get into each of the storylines, but let's just say a witch, a vampire, and more. And it's a great movie.
Maybe it's a great opening to a joke.
Yeah.
A witch, a vampire, a rabbi walk into a bar. Okay, well, wait, what decade was that? It was the 60s, right?
63, yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, I always am left disappointed with our Halloween episodes because I don't really think we're doing movies that we should be doing that really live up to the hype surrounding the season. And I don't know what you meant by not horror. I think I always associate Halloween with horror. Tony, what do you want? Like Jake Gyllenhaal in October Sky? Like is that more seasonal? But no, I am gonna go horror. And I'm not fucking around this time. So I'm just gonna go what is it? 1982. Yeah, 1982 is The Thing. I dare you to say no to this, Tony. I fucking dare you to say no to John Carpenter's The Thing from 1982. So, pick Connor's Monkey Shine 2 or Anthony's 3 Wives and a Lady, or I forget what his movie was called. No, but, The Thing, classic. I'm not even gonna, I mean, it speaks for itself. We all have that common reference. We've all seen it, I'm sure. I think there are classics worth discussing on this podcast, and I think it'd be a fun one. So that's my pick.
Tony left.
I was disgusted with that choice. I said nothing scary. I'm not gonna be able to sleep. I'm gonna have a heart attack. All right, Connor, bring us home. Bring us home. We got some Halloween Town 2. What do we got? What do we got this time?
Oh, okay. So I had two picks. I hate pick guys. I hate the Halloween movies thing. I'm not versed in horror. I literally both of my decades were taken. This is the first time the Kirk protocol has totally bit me in the ass. But you know what? Fuck it. 2002 Scooby-Doo and the Witch's Ghost, motherfucker. Let's fucking do it. The direct-to-video, watch it on Cartoon Network. This is a fucking classic Halloween film. To me, it'll always be associated with Halloween. It is I don't have anything else. I had 2 movies, they're both taken. I think it's worth revisiting. Okay, maybe if you've seen it, of course, the Hex Girls. That's all I'll say. Truly iconic, amazing title theme song, if I recall correctly. Literally, I have nothing else. I had two movies. They were both taken for the decade, but that's just what it's got to be. I'm sorry.
I think we may need to end the podcast if we're already down to Scooby-Doo and the Witch's Gift. That's where we're. If that's where Connor's at with the horror movies, might be. We thought we'd make it to episode 100. It just might not. We just missed it. All right. No, actually, in all seriousness, I'm loving these nominations because they're all completely different and they're all like I could totally see us doing an episode on any of these. I'm dead serious. I think they'd all be fun to do. But let's all right, let's do our rebuttals now. Anthony, why are these ridiculous and dumb choices? and also, well, we have to do a double feature with Iron Man if we watch your film.
Well, first of all, Orpheus loved the Scooby-Doo choice. He was gnawing at my headphones left and right, eager for Connor's defense of that film. He has many things to say. But I gotta say, in defense of Connor, of that choice, the Hex Girls are forever stained on our minds, right? I haven't seen it since it was on Cartoon Network in like 2003. I'm sure it's worth rewatching. And Kirk's film is a classic. I love The Thing. I'm sure Connor thinks the Mary Elizabeth Winstead version's better. But the Kurt Russell version of The Thing is the way to go. It's fantastic. It's a solid movie. I don't know if it fits the Halloween choice. I think Black Sabbath, a classic kind of a horror picture in the 1960s that still holds up today, is the way to go. And I'll just say it's a very literary choice. It's a very Anthony film, but in a good way. It's a very Halloween Anthony film. So that's what Orpheus and I are nominating.
All right. Yeah, I don't know what the Scooby-Doo thing even is. I think this is where the age gap is showing its relevance. What year did it come out? 2003?
2002, I believe it was released.
Okay. Yeah, by that time, like, I went to Iraq the next year for vacation, and it wasn't very fun. But Scooby-Doo, I don't think there's anything to be done with that. I mean, I can already picture the artwork. I'm not going to look it up, and I can hear the white plastic VHS case opening up, and popping it in, and God, is this what we've become, right? Is this who we are? Do we want to be considered refined and respectable? I'm concerned.
I think that ship sailed like the first episode we did, but
excuse me. I mean, if you want to conflate Scooby-Doo with Spice World, you're just going to come off as a sexist, but it's on tape, I guess. So
hey, the Hex Girls are like the Spice Girls.
Oh, okay, I see.
You might even say they're superior. All right,
I like Hourglass Girls. I don't really like Hex Girls, but I will say I don't know anything about Anthony's movie except that it's split in three. I think we just did a movie that felt kind of segmented. Nice to have this, how about we have a story that takes place over what's the thing? It's like 3 days, maybe. There's something that's got going for it. No, I think the aesthetic of the thing is what's so striking, right? How many movies take place on Antarctica? Life of Penguins or whatever that one's called. So I think it's worth looking at. It's the elements have been, I don't know this, I'm making this a verb, but it's been pastiched to death by other films, and rightfully so because it's so good. And John Carpenter's a genius in his own right. So yeah, that's my choice. I mean, ultimately, Tony, it's going to be, we all know what the best film being put forth is. So it's just going to be like how ironic you want to be, but we'll see.
I know it's I'm sitting on kind of like the prestige pick here. I'll try to be generous, kind of condescend a bit to my co-hosts, but Scooby-Doo and the Witch's Ghost is the greatest of the Scooby-Doo films. Cyber Chase, no good. A lot of people do like Zombie Island. I think that was higher budget, but none of them have the kind of the staying power and the cultural relevance of Scooby-Doo and the Witch's Ghost. Yeah, which is, yes, in large part due to the Hex Girls, but that obviously, like, I think there's a place for that as well. And I think we will draw like an enormous audience of sad, lonely millennials to our YouTube channel. And I think like this is going to be the thing that really like makes us. Yeah. As for the other ones, okay, I was gonna do Nightmare on Elm Street. That was my first choice. Okay, I should have known '80s was probably going to be taken. Then I had Rosemary's Baby. I guess I shouldn't divulge that, but Polanski, I felt a little bad about that. But I do. That is a prestige pick. 1960s. What can you do? Okay, so I'm left with Scooby Doo and the Witch's Ghost, and it is a classic in its genre. And yeah,
Someone has to say real quick before you choose, Tony, that if it's Scooby Doo next time, it's right after, and I'll just leave that in here.
And
Are you
after
saying,
that,
Tony? Well, go ahead. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say after that it's murder suicide, but go ahead.
I know that's a daunting gauntlet right there, man. Okay, I'm having a tough time here, to be honest. Anthony, you came in real strong with that opening pitch, but as soon as I heard the other two, it disappeared. I'm sorry. It sounds great. That would be a great Halloween episode. I've never seen it. I'd love to see Black Sabbath. It sounds awesome. I love a good anthology horror movie, but it can't stand up to the competition here. Kirk, you came in, you just put your dick on the table. I mean, The Thing, it's The Thing. It's a great horror movie. No one's gonna. I think this is one of the 4 horror movies Connor has seen, and he does like it. From what I know of him, he's nodding. Okay, good. It's a great movie. It's a straight up classic. I do love The Thing. I think it's absolutely perfect for a Halloween episode. Witch's Ghost, though. I mean, I don't know. Connor, I mean, I think he's rearing himself up. He's getting himself hyped on it. I think he's flying by the seat of his pants, and he just kind of grabs something, and now he's really owning it. The promise of just adoring fans swarming us at the podcast conventions, obviously, like, that's what's going to happen as a direct proximate result of us doing this episode. But no, I mean, I think it will be very fun, honestly. Although I am, Connor kind of shit on the Zombie Island fans, but I'm a Zombie Island fan. Is it basic? Perhaps, but no, it's tough. Honestly, no, I'm really torn. I think that I kind of want to do the Scooby-Doo one, honestly. In this moment, that's the one I want to watch more. Let's why not? Let's do it.
I love how it's Pee-wee, Harmonium, Scooby-Doo.
We need a palate cleanser. We need a palate cleanser after Harmonium. Kirk, I'm sorry. I was very close, but Connor, I think Connor won me over at the end. I think it'll just be a fun episode. And the fact that
it will be fun because I'm gonna show up having eaten 50 Datura seeds, and I'm gonna be tripping my fucking dick off. Because that's the only way I'm going to be able to sit through this movie. So
that'll make the episode even better.
Yeah, well, we'll see. We'll see.
I hope everyone reads the necessary fan fiction before the episode as well. We're sending it along.
Oh, yeah.
Listen, it has a place in canon, I think, and has a good shot. And I'm glad, that I can share my extensive knowledge of Halloween and horror movies with you guys.
I feel bad because Kirk every year comes with like a really legit, really serious, like an actual horror movie, which is what I'm always like. We need actual horror movies. And then when the time comes for me to put, my money where my mouth is. I go to McDonald's and eat a cheeseburger because that's what I happen to want in that moment. But no, I think it'll be a really fun episode. Kirk, it's all right. You'll get one in soon.
All right. I'll have what she's having.